Greetings from Geneva and welcome to you all. I'm Gongyuan Liu, Coordinator, Governance and International Cooperation of the Secretariat of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, that also serves as the Secretariat of the Protocol to Eliminate Illicit Trade in Tobacco Products. Welcome to this side event at the 10th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, UNTOC. Most of you must be very familiar with Webex, the platform we are going to use for this virtual event. But I would still like to take a few moments to point out some main tools we are going to use available for our meeting today. First, you can find the main menu by hovering your mouse over the bottom of the screen. Second, for any questions addressed to the moderator, speakers, or the co-organizers of the side event, please use the chat function. Third, please unmute your microphone and only when the moderator gives you the floor to speak or ask a question. With that, I would like to hand over the floor to the moderator of today's side event, Dr. Adriana Blanco Mocrizo. Dr. Mocrizo, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Wan-Yan. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, President of the meetings of the parties, distinguished panelists. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Welcome to the SAI event on the Protocol to Eliminate Illicit Trade on Tobacco Products, a new instrument to fight organized crime, which has been jointly organized by the Secretariat of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and the government of Ecuador. My name, as Wan-Yan have said, is Adriana Blanco Marquizo, and I'm the head of the Secretariat of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, or as we call it, the WHO FCTC. My team and I comprise a small secretariat hosted by the World Health Organization in Geneva, and we also serve the protocol to eliminate illicit trade in tobacco products. We owe a special thanks to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and to the government of Ecuador, who have kindly agreed to assist with this side event, which offers two very valuable opportunities. First, it will allow us to bring the critical issue of illicit trade in tobacco products to your attention. Second, and equally important, it will provide us with an opportunity to learn from your experiences. Originally, our work was grounded in the kind of public health policies contained in the WHO FCTC, dealing with things such as tobacco regulation and taxation, product labeling, and smoke-free environments. However, the Protocol to Eliminate Illicit Trade in Tobacco Products, which is just 2 years old, is moving the Secretariat and its 62 parties into new areas of work, areas in which many of you are so accustomed to working, such as law enforcement, custom, and the judiciary. Certainly, it will be bad enough if tobacco simply harms health. But tobacco reach goes much further, negatively impacting the economy, the environment, and the sustainable development. The WHO FCTC and the protocol not only support the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal 3 on health and well-being, but also SDG 8 on sustainable economic growth and decent work, as well as SDG 16 targets such as decreasing illicit financial flows, combating organized crime, and decreasing corruption and bribery. Over the years, tobacco taxation has proven to be an effective tool to decrease tobacco use, but it also provides revenue to finance sustainable development in line with the recommendation of the 2015 Addis Ababa Action Agenda. Acting to eliminate illicit trade in tobacco products can safeguard these revenues so they can be used by governments that desperately need sources of funding to help finance recovery efforts during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Organized crime and illicit trade in any form or for any product or substance threaten this source of income, and certainly illicit trade in tobacco is not an exception. I look forward to cooperating with you in order to prevent this from happening. In today's session, we will look at various aspects of the protocol, as well as the relationship between illicit trade and illicit financial flows, and also country experiences in tackling the illicit trade in tobacco products. So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to today's first speaker, Mr. Fernando Chacón, who is the president of the Meeting of the Parties to the Protocol, Director of Cooperation and International Relations in the Ministry of Public Health of Ecuador, who will provide an introduction to the protocol to eliminate illicit trade in tobacco products and the importance of becoming a party to it. Please, Mr. Chacón.
Dear Adriana, thank you very much for your introduction. I would like to present my excuses based on my Latin American accent first, but I would like to speak as slowly and as clear as possible. So thank you very much to everybody which is gathered into this very important and specific event. As already stated by Ms. Adriana Blanco, the protocol has a key role into the implementation of effective policies against all sources of illicit trade in regard to the production of tobacco. And in this regard, the element, the real scope of the protocol, and as you know, is based on the Article 15 of the World Health Organization FCTC. Could we please go back to the previous slide? No, the next one. So, in this regard, I would like to make sure that we do understand appropriately that there is a specific impact in regard to the illicit trade and tobacco products in regard to the scale and the impact. So in this regard, we have to take into account that almost 10% of the global cigarette trade is illicit at this moment. So the importance of the protocol is based on this specific regard. Why? Because it increases affordability and availability of tobacco products, impacting the most vulnerable, and this is pretty key. As long as we are speaking about teenagers, young people, and vulnerable groups who have easy and instant access to this. So, what will be a key in this regard? It reduces government revenues to be used otherwise, which has, of course, taxative impact into the countries, into the regions, and it weakens security, fosters corruption and organized crime by multiple channels, which can be even seen as legal in some ways. Could we go to the next slide, please? So, as Adriana already mentioned, the protocol to eliminate illicit trade in tobacco products is basically new. It's a new international treaty based on the Article 15 of the World Health Organization FCTC, which has one specific and key objective: to eliminate all forms of illicit trade in tobacco products. That's the key idea in this regard. And of course, with this objective, to eliminate any kind of illegal activity related to the trade of the tobacco products. So it entered into force on the 25th of September 2018. That's why we consider it a new element. But to date, we have 52 parties from all regions, and 96% of them are also parties of the UNTOC. Please, let's continue to the next slide. So, what is the importance of the protocol to eliminate illicit trade in tobacco products? First of all, that we have a clear framework in order to take key measures with compulsory obligations, but also with a time frame in order to strengthen some critical aspects, such as we have an articles from the 6th to the 13th articles, which speak about the strengthening of the supply chain. And in this regard, we have specific measures on how to secure the supply chain of tobacco products, which mean including the establishments of a global tracking regime by 2023, which is now one key aspect that is being discussed into the priority agenda of the Secretariat of the FCTC, and that we are speaking strongly through the regional coordinations and into the worldwide planning processes. So in this regard, we also have law enforcement suggestion and processes from the Article 14 to the 19, which are measures to ensure prosecution, sanctions, and liabilities from illicit tobacco trade under domestic legislation. And this is a key aspect which supports the work of national mechanisms that work against illicit trade, and of course fosters and strengthens cooperation at regional and intra-regional level. So this is a key aspect of the protocol. And also we have one key aspect, which is the international cooperation. And we also have a specific working group on international cooperation in this regard, which aims to foster and to strengthen measures on cooperation among parties on technical, administrative, and legal matters related to implementation of the protocol. Please continue. So one key aspect of the protocol is that it strongly depends on the intra-regional and regional and international cooperations among the parties. So it is key to understand that cooperation is a path which allows us to share information, to have a better understanding of the practices of the industry and of illegal practices among different countries, and which allow us to identify faster and in a better way what kind of mechanisms are being used in order to strengthen or to work in illegal channels on the trade of tobacco. So in this regard, it is key to understand that international cooperation is pretty aimed, especially in regard to the strengthening of the global tracking and tracking regime. So by international cooperation measures implemented or described into the protocol, we have the possibility to sharing, to facilitate an exchange of information and foster assistance and cooperation, and as already mentioned, but which is key also is to include including sensitive areas such as investigation and prosecution. We also have the possibility to work deeply in terms of mutual administrative and legal assistance, which is something that really have to be strengthened worldwide in order to stop these kind of practices, and which needs to ensure mutual and administrative assistance between parties for the purpose of investigation and prosecution, which is key and which is pretty described into the protocol as well. And one key aspect is the sovereignty and jurisdiction and extradition to ensure the state jurisdiction over criminal offenses and to ensure extradition. So in that regard, the protocol plays a key role in regard to the implementation of measures which tend not also to strengthen national mechanisms for the implementation of the protocol, but also to strengthen and deepen cooperation among technical aspects, but also legal, customs, and other processes which will be worked by other, which will be approached by other members of this side event, but which are pretty key. We don't have to forget, and we really have to take into account that the protocol really depends on a multi-sectoral and an open view in regard to the problem of the illicit trade of tobacco. Even though the protocol and the convention have a public health end, which is to secure public health, of course, and the reduction of fatalities and mortalities under the tobacco use, we have to take into account that this is key for us to work at that intersectoral perspective in order to strengthen our capacities of tracking, of punishing bad practices. And in this regard, the protocol is the adequate framework which give us, as already stated, a time frame, a legal basis, and of course, operational mechanisms to strengthen our work against tobacco illegal trade. So please continue. Let's continue to the last slide, please. I just would like to mention that at the moment, I am the president of the meeting of the parties, and this is also a key part of the protocol and of the commission in order to strengthen these mechanisms. And this is pretty important to know that we are continue working in order to strengthen the work of the Secretariat worldwide as a technical partner, but also as a source of cooperation for all the countries that are pretty committed with the fight against illegal tobacco trade. So in this regard, we are the governing body of the protocol to eliminate illicit trade in the tobacco products. And we are continue working under this difficult pandemic situation. Of course, we have to readequate our work, but we are deeply committed and permanently working in order to strengthen implementation of the protocol. And I would like to make a public not invitation, but at least to make sure that the second session of the meetings of the parties will be held in The Hague on Netherlands from the 15th to the 17th of November in 2021. So it will be key to come with as much participation as possible to make sure that we strengthen the community and that we have a priority and a key role into the implementation of this kind of these measures, which are key for the successful implementation of the protocol and the convention. So thank you very much, Adriana, and thank you very much for the team.
Thank you very much, Fernando Chacon. I would like now to give the floor to our second speaker, and I will apologize in advance if I mispronounce his name, so I apologize. Mr. Olensky Feschenko, advisor to the UNODC Global Program Against Money Laundering, who will speak on the relation between illicit financial flows and the illicit trade in tobacco products. Please, Mr. Feschenko, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, I will speak briefly about the similarity of anti-money laundering measures and the measures in protocol. Slide, you can see that anti-money laundering legislation is already in place for many years. And we are used to the situation when we open accounts in the banks ask us questions. They have our identity. They know what is our business. They have blacklists. They kick out people who possess too high risk. The same are already placed in the protocol, but they are applied not to money, but they apply to the flows of tobacco control. So, next slide, please. When governments think how all these quite complex measures in the protocol, there is one solution. Just check your anti-money laundering legislation, and you will see that these mechanisms, they are already in place. For example, how to set up a due diligence system. Well, first, government or proper supervisor make instruction. What you need to check, how you need to check, which questions to documents to keep, etc. Important thing is due diligence deals with uncertainty. For example, we have a provider that comes from, I don't know, say, a risky area, famous for cigarette smuggling. Then probably risk level should be higher. What should we do in the high risk scenario? Accept, not accept. Find some clarifications, do additional inquiry. How to do it? What risk is acceptable? This all this is put into instruction and regulations. Central banks are doing this for, I believe, already for several decades. So the mechanism is here. Again, it's quite helpful to have blacklists, like government, or it's a supranational list, any entity issue blacklists of partners, companies, providers that should not be involved in tobacco supply chain because they are too risky or they are known to be involved in illicit activities. No problem. All participants, they check these blacklists, and they are not allowed to get into relations with the black entities. Easy. there should be a function, a person who is responsible for this due diligence in tobacco supply chain. It's a well-known institute of compliance officers with all machinery behind. Again, reporting suspicious activities. Banks are doing it already for many years. They report to Special Financial Investigations Unit. So the idea is it's possible to very quickly set up all the system for monitoring and especially for due diligence checks in tobacco supply chain, and just get expertise from anti-money laundering services from anti-money laundering area. Next slide, please. Another thing that relates to illicit financial flows. Protocol says about criminalizations and about possibility to seizure the payments. You can use very powerful anti-money laundering legislation, also to apply it for proceeds from illicit tobacco trade, but it's necessary to make one small step. For money laundering crime, there is a list of so-called predicate offenses. Each country defines it by itself, but with known standards. For example, organized crime, corruption, drug trade, they are all considered so-called predicate offenses, and anti-money laundering legislation is applicable. Just make sure that illicit tobacco trade is a predicate offense, and then you literally don't need to do much more, because automatically you will inherit all anti-money laundering machinery, all anti-money laundering legislation. To get a ready mechanisms to free of suspicious money, it's already here. Seizure and confiscation of crime proceeds, it's already covered by anti-money laundering legislation. You get quite powerful mechanisms for international cooperation to trace money that come from illicit tobacco trade. And you get access to all of this by doing just one simple step. Make sure that illicit tobacco trade is a predicate offense. How to do it, how to deal with anti-money laundering measures, that's exactly what UNODC Global Program Against Money Laundering is doing, and we are happy to cooperate with the WHO and to help any member states to introduce such system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Feshenko. I will now like to give the floor to speakers who will present country experiences. And the first speaker will be Mr. Vygantas Paigosinas, Deputy Director General of the Customs Department of Lithuania. Now, he has the floor to share his country's experiences as a protocol party fighting illicit trade in tobacco products. Please, Mr. Paigosinas, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the floor and good afternoon to everyone. Well, my intervention will be about, as it was mentioned already, about the Lithuanian experience regarding the cigarette smuggling, the current case, and some proposals regarding the further joint steps. Well, Lithuania is a European Union member state and in the northeast part of the EU, and has an external border with the Belarus, the longest one, and also shares the external border with the Kaliningrad region, Russian Federation. And cigarette smuggling and illicit tobacco products are in general are on the top of the list of the problems for the recent decades in the country. Also, particularly for the customs office, illegal market of the tobacco products now is estimated to be around 18% at the moment, and it's already more or less differing for 3 years. But it's worth to mention that 10 years ago, in 2010, we had more than 40% of the legal market share. Well, the other important area or the figure that we also monitor is the seizures. And well, the seizures are actually increasing each year. I mean, the cigarettes. If, for example, last year in total, customs, police, and border guards in Lithuania we seized and confiscated 250 million pieces, which is a very big amount. Actually, not only for relatively small countries such as Lithuania, but in general, it's 25,000 master cases, each containing 50 cartons or 10,000 pieces. And this year, during three first quarters, solely customs seized 265 million pieces of cigarettes. So it's taking customs, measuring customs figures, it's increasing 80% comparing to last year. And according to our intelligence, more than 50% or more than half of the seized cigarettes were dedicated not for our black market, but were destined for the Western European countries' illegal markets. And more than about 90% and more than 90% of the seized cigarettes, also the illegal market shares the same figures, and consists of the cigarettes originating from Belarus. And this is actually the main problem at the moment. We keep doing. We are among the first countries to join the protocol, and we look forward to strengthening all the possible areas. And what we keep doing already for a rather long period is strengthening the enforcement area, investigation and control equipment, risk management systems, and so on. Trying the strategical aim at the state level to reduce the numbers of the smokers itself, and all national measures are closely monitored and coordinated by the special governmental body created to fight the shadow economy in general. But one of the main fields and very important area is the illicit cigarette market, fighting the cigarette smuggling and illegal possession. What we see at the moment, there are more than 60 parties already, parties to the protocol. We also are the parties, as I already mentioned, but we ourselves and the rest of the Western European countries, we are considered to be as the destination countries for the illicit tobacco products, or as Lithuania particularly, we are also the transit country. Despite the fact that we have a really good and well constructed international treaty instruments such as protocol, some of the objectives may not be reached in the same manner as it is now. I mean, while the source countries will not join the protocol, will not be on board, and will not see the necessity to apply the same measures. I will speak particularly about the Belarus. It doesn't worth to talk at the moment about track and trace systems, due diligence, supply chain control, and things like that, while the cigarette smuggling itself is not the criminal offense in this country. And it is considered to be as the minor administrative offense. And even in sense of the requirement, very clear requirement according to the protocol and most of the international treaties, the seized and confiscated goods must be destroyed. So even now in Belarus, the seized goods, they are confiscated and resold again to the same market. So it's really difficult to talk about the same things and to try to reach the same objectives in common, while some of the major source countries are not on board now. So the main idea and what I'm driving at is that we should strengthen all our efforts in all possible international forums and societies to force, to a certain extent, even such countries as Belarus to come on board and to at least try to discuss, first of all, how the protocol provisions could be implemented in such countries as Belarus. It's difficult to imagine, of course, especially knowing that the main tobacco factory in Belarus that is feeding all the illegal market in EU at the moment is owned by state and is the fifth biggest taxpayer that forms the state budget, actually. So it is really tough to reach such a goal, but we should concentrate and try to put all our efforts towards that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Valgosinas. I will now like to give the floor to Mr. Steve Kent, Head of the Tobacco Policy Delivery Team at the Revenue and Custom Authority of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, to talk about his country's experience. Mr. Kent, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon from the UK. If we can move to the first slide, please. Next slide. First of all, I'll ask a simple question, which is, why do we care so much about countering the illicit tobacco trade? Firstly, the obvious, it leads to loss of important government revenues. But in the case of tobacco, there is an added dimension in that the criminals are also undermining the health objectives of the UK government. Our tobacco tax policies are driving up tobacco prices to help reduce smoking. If people can buy cheap, illicit tobacco, those prices are inevitably undermined. If illicit trade is successful, it also means unfair competition for legitimate businesses, and it also means that the criminals can plough their profits back into wider illicit activity like drugs, human trafficking, and various. That's why we care. Next slide, please. This slide is really just to give an idea of how significant our tax is in relation to the price, and therefore how lucrative the fraud can be. An average price packet of cigarettes at the moment will cost you just under 10 British pounds, which is about 11 euros, or I believe almost 12 US dollars. The combined excise and sales tax we charge in the UK make up about 82% of the average retail price of a legitimate product. Next slide, please. And similarly, this for roll your own or hand rolling tobacco, about 74% of an average pack price is taxes. So you can see how much our high tax policies are helping to drive up the price and support our health objectives. But at the same time, if tax is such a big element, it also means that there is a huge motivation and potential profit for the illicit trade. Next slide, please. There are different methods of tobacco fraud. The biggest problem we have in the UK is smuggling, and that can take different forms. Firstly, we can have genuine, well-known, popular brands being sold in other countries, but then smuggled onto the UK market. We also have some problems with counterfeit products smuggled into the UK. There are also what are known in terminology as cheap whites, which are often produced legally where they're manufactured, but are smuggled into other markets for sale. They have no real market where they're produced. We also have some growing evidence of illicit production in the UK. all these types of frauds occur at present, but there have been shifts in the pattern over time, partly due to criminals finding more profitable methods as time passes, but sometimes this is also because we've been successful in making some types of fraud more difficult. Next slide, please. In the last 15 or so years, we've more than doubled our tobacco taxes. We have a tax escalator at the moment where we put another at least 2% on top of inflation for tobacco every year. But our estimate in the same period is that the illicit market is actually declined. The estimated illicit market for cigarettes was 16% in 2006, but you can see it's been halved since then. And the illicit share for hand rolling was as bad as 60% in 2006. That was over half of the market. But again, it appears to have almost halved. So we've managed to increase tobacco taxes in the UK, but at the same time cut the fraud. So it appears we've had some success. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, back in 2000, we had a big problem, and it was accepted that we needed to do something. And as a result, we introduced a strategy published to fight the fraud. This has continued to evolve and adapt over the years and has gone through different versions. The latest version is called From Leaf to Light, and we do publish this online in case anyone wants to look afterwards. As part of that strategy, we're quite clear that our aim is to create a hostile global environment for tobacco fraud. This is an important part of the strategy, and to this end, we see mutual information and intelligence sharing, as mentioned by the other speakers, as being pretty vital. Next slide, please. When we started our strategy in 2000, we already had a long-standing system of excise controls over tobacco producers and warehouses with lots of provisions which are familiar to the protocol, but it was apparent that we needed to strengthen our controls. I've listed a number of the key legal changes we've made since 2000. There's limited time today, so I'm not going to talk in detail about these, but I wanted to point out that with the exception of fiscal marks, all these key changes, you can find them in the protocol. As I say, the UK introduced most of these long before we ratified the protocol in 2018, but that's because a lot of what we see in the protocol, we see as simply good practice for countries that don't want to encourage tobacco crime or who want to have functioning tobacco taxes. Certainly, we believe all these measures are important in our fight against fraud. Next slide, please. And just finally, just to summarize the importance of the protocol as far as we see it. In summary, tobacco fraud is very much a global problem. Organized crime, we all know, is international, so an international response is essential. The protocol offers a framework of regulatory measures that can counteract the fraud and also the prospect of better international cooperation between authorities. And we believe without this international framework, there's less chance national authorities can control and successfully tax tobacco, which would lead also to a failure of health objectives for governments, and more chance that crime would thrive. So that, in conclusion, is my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kent. So once again, I thank you all the panelists for the presentation and for taking into account the time allotted. That was we are doing very good with the time. So now I would like to open the floor for questions and answers. For that, I will give the floor to my colleague, Johnny Decker, who will read the question received from the participants to the CIVE event through the chat. So please, Johnny, you can have the floor.
Thank you, Adriana. First question that we have received And I think this is for both our last two speakers, Mr. Pagonisas and Mr. Kent. And the question is what type of local research has been most instrumental in pushing control of illicit trade in front of the agenda for tobacco control in your country? And maybe Mr. Pagonisas can go first, and then Mr. Kent, if you have anything to add to that.
Could you please repeat the very beginning of the question?
Of course. What type of local research has been most instrumental in pushing control of illicit trade in front of the agenda for tobacco control in your country?
Well, actually, at least in Lithuania, we still do not have the official or state-approved illegal market estimation model or methodology. We still count on the joint research conducted by the tobacco producers, biggest tobacco producers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kent. Do you have anything to add on your national experience with local research and the influence?
Yeah, I think in terms of what HMRC produces, I mentioned our published tax gap figures in my slides, which is our analysis of the extent of the fraud in the UK. That's helpful. But also, besides that, we do have analysts that work within HMRC that are looking at the different types of fraud that occur. Obviously, a lot of the information and intelligence that they have and their assessment of the illicit tobacco threats, they're quite sensitive. So, I mean, we only publish certain things, as you can probably understand. But we also do take account of all of the other studies that are done too. I mean, the assessment of the amount of fraud, we have, as I say, measuring tax gaps, but there are also studies done by trade, which we obviously think our studies are correct, but we obviously take account and look at those too.
Thank you very much. Next question is for Mr. Feshenko of the UNODC. How do you ensure AML-style due diligence measures on illicit tobacco don't just end up being brand protection measures for the major firms by excluding cheaper competition or smaller producers?
Well, the answer is the same. How we make sure that anti-money laundering measures normal, they don't, harm small financial institutions. The answer is simple. You need to have government supervision mechanisms. And if anti-money laundering measures are misused, then government competent authority just stops it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then the next question we have is again for Mr. Pagonisas. In your country, what is the nature of the groups involved in cigarette smuggling? For example, are they part of mafia groups, organized gang, opportunistic syndicates, etc.? And do you have evidence that cigarette manufacturers are directly involved in smuggling networks? And also, are any of these groups comprised of particular nationalities?
I'm not in a position at the moment to discuss very deeply and to go into details regarding the organized group, but yes, generally speaking, most of the cases are related with the organized crime. And mainly they are consisting of the Lithuanian citizens, but of course the very strong relationship exists with the Belarusians, with the rest of the European countries' organized crime representatives.
Thank you very much. This is for Mr. Jacome. There are various NGOs, IGOs, and other experts that develop materials, reports, and evidence-based findings to tackle illicit trade in tobacco products. Are you collaborating with NGOs and IGOs and other experts to ensure the most efficient guidelines for the protocol for its implementation? How do you think you should cooperate with them? How do you choose them? So the question is about NGOs, IGOs, and other experts to help you implement the protocol, Mr. Jacome.
Thank you very much. I think that this is a key question, and yes, of course, there are some specific mechanisms to cooperate with the Secretariat to cooperate with the implementation of the protocol. But moreover, I would like to make a call, and this is a key aspect for organizations that do conduct their efforts in order to fight illicit trade on tobacco to strengthen their cooperation also with national and regional implementation mechanisms, which are maybe the most important aspect in regard to the implementation of the protocol. As I said before, there are some specific channels to cooperate with the Secretariat, and basically there is a process which should be observed in terms of interest and in terms of the role that they play in regard to the company of tobacco and the role that we have. But basically, kind of support is key in order to strengthen the national mechanisms and especially the technical arm, the technical capacities for the implementation. So this is key. As we said before, the protocol provides this framework for not only the Secretariat, but also regional and national and inter-regional cooperation in terms of how to implement policies and technical mechanisms. So we have working groups that do work in this regard based on the different members that assist and work in regard of member states and other partners. But as I said before, I think that there is a specific need for NGOs and other civil society groups to be engaged and to strengthen their cooperation with national mechanisms. We basically are working strongly to the implementation of the framework and of the protocol into their countries, and that really has a specific impact in regard to the implementation of policies and to share information, especially in terms of traceability and monitoring. So that will be my response to that key question. So for information in order how to cooperate with the Secretary, we have an standardized process, and we can always get in contact for those proposals. But that will be my question. My response.
Thank you very much. Next question I have is to Mr. Kent. To what extent would you attribute the decline in illicit trade in the UK to tax increases? What practical interventions, other than legislative measures, have yielded success?
Obviously, the legal measures, I think, have been significant. The one thing that we did do, and I mentioned it on the slide, back in about 2006, was we introduced effectively a due diligence control on tobacco manufacturers to think about who they supplied to in tobacco supply chains. And I think that's probably had some impact. That's our conclusion. That's a legal measure. Also operationally, very importantly, we've adapted our strategy as we've seen new types of fraud emerge. We've introduced new schemes on things like raw tobacco and tobacco manufacturing equipment to try and counter the emerging risk of illicit production. But we also have a network of officers that work internationally. They're called Fiscal Crime Liaison officers, and they're attached to embassies worldwide and work with local law enforcement authorities to identify fraud risks, share intelligence, and they've had some success, I think, in countering the fraud. I think it's difficult to honestly tell you. I don't think anyone could honestly tell you that This percentage of the decline is due to that reason, and that percentage is due to another reason. But certainly overall, we've managed to keep a lid on the overall level of fraud, even though our tax rates have increased significantly.
Thank you very much. I think we still have time for a few questions. This one is for, I can open my door, for Mr. Feshenko again. How do you believe that the protocol to eliminate illicit trade in tobacco products is useful for fighting trade-based money laundering schemes?
Thank you. I don't think that illicit tobacco protocol addresses trade-based money laundering. Trade-based money laundering, it's a bit different thing. Usually in trade-based, we have some other crimes, and then proceeds are laundered through the trade in absolutely legal goods. They are just overpriced or underpriced. The protocol addresses a totally different situation. We have a very particular type of crime. It's illicit trade in tobacco. And then we try to destroy the predicate offense, and also we try to take away proceeds of this particular crime. Generally, there are two different concepts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a question maybe to you, Adriana. The protocol is a meaningful initiative to address illicit trade. How do you ensure that the ministries of health collaborate with the relevant experts in the implementation of the protocol provisions, whether with public authorities considered as experts like customs or law enforcement authorities, or experts from the private sectors or from think tanks?
Thank you, Johnny. Definitely the work of the work in tobacco control in general is multisectorial, because even though tobacco is a health issue, many of the solutions for this are outside of the portfolio of the Ministry of Health. So that is in general for tobacco control. Specifically for the protocol, this is even more. But I still think that health has a role to play, because at the end of the day, this is a protocol that is emanated of a health convention that is looking for the problem of illicit trade from the perspective of public health. We are not talking about illicit trade because in many illicit trade of product, you will seizure products and you will then need to be paid the taxes and then put it in the market again, while in this case we want to destroy this product because they are harmful for the health. So I think that the way that ensure the participation of health and also the participation of all the integrants, because this is not something that health can do by itself, because we don't have the knowledge, and still the people who have the knowledge need the reminder of the public health aspect of this. So I think that the best way is to work an intersectorial way, and that is what we call for the countries, to have a commission and sectorial task force that can work in this problem together. Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you very much. I think we still have time for one last question. That is a question to both the representatives of the United Kingdom and of Lithuania. Participants would like to know if other countries have expressed their willingness to implement the same experience as you are having in Lithuania and the United Kingdom in the context of the fight against the illicit tobacco trade and the related money laundering. So, Mr. Kent, if I first can give the floor to you, and then I give the floor to Mr. Poigosinas.
We're always talking to a number of countries about how they can counter tobacco fraud. I think people see us when it comes to tobacco control as being fairly advanced in terms of the level of controls that we have and the history of tobacco compliance. I don't want to start naming particular countries that we talk to, but we certainly, if countries reach out to us, sometimes through the World Health Organization, then we would certainly assist them. In terms of how many countries are interested in signing up to the protocol, I probably am not the best person to answer that question, if that's part of the question that's being asked.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pargosinas, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, regarding the cooperation between the already mentioned final destination countries such as UK and France, Germany, and the transit countries such as more likely is Lithuania in this regard. The cooperation has a long history and there are no problems. Actually, we are on the same way and seeking for the same, trying to reach the same goals. When it comes again to the third countries, especially from the perspective of the EU, or the countries that the cigarettes are being, especially the countries the cigarettes are being produced in, and no good or good promising experiences so far, because we are talking about already mentioned by Mr. Kent the cheap whites and the huge overproduction of the cigarettes that are already obviously not dedicated for the internal consumption or the legal export. It's dedicated for the black markets of the other countries.
Thank you very much. With that last answer, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. We have many questions that are still coming in. Please feel free to send any of your remaining questions to our email address, protocolfctc@who.int. This will also be put in the chat, so you can all click that link and send us your questions by email. And before we wrap up, I would like to give the floor back to Adriana for the official closing of this side event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johnny, for your help with the questions. So I will thank you again to all the participants for the questions, and we have tried to address, as Johnny said, most of them. So she will put in the chat our email address. You can further them to this email address. So with this, we have come to the end of our session. I would like to thank all participants, the co-organizers of the side event, and especially our distinguished panelists for their contribution. Wishing you all a good continuation of the 10th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN TOC. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the day. Bye.